I had been living alone in my apartment for almost 8 months. Life was simple. I worked during the day, came home at night, and spent most weekends watching movies or playing video games. Nothing unusual ever happened, until I started finding grocery receipts. The first one was lying on my kitchen counter when I got home from work. I picked it up, confused. The receipt showed items like bread, milk, eggs, and bottled water. The strange thing was that I hadn't gone shopping. Not that day. Not even that week. I assumed the receipt belonged to a previous customer and had somehow gotten stuck to one of my grocery bags. It seemed harmless. A few days later, I found another receipt. This one was on my dining table. Different store, different date, different items. My stomach tightened. I lived alone. Nobody else should have been inside my apartment. I threw it away and tried not to think about it. But the receipts kept appearing. One on the bathroom sink, another near my couch. One even appeared on my bed. Each receipt was from a different store. Each one showed purchases I never made. The weirdest part? The dates and times matched hours when I was at work. I began checking the locks obsessively. Everything was secure. Nothing was missing. No valuables had been touched. Then one evening, I noticed something terrifying. A carton of orange juice in my refrigerator was half empty. I never drank orange juice. I hated it. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, before leaving for work, I placed my laptop webcam facing the kitchen and left it recording. When I got home, I immediately checked the footage. At first, nothing happened. Then, around 1:43 p.m., movement appeared on screen, almost like he wanted me to find it. The man had apparently been living inside the walls of the building. What still bothers me isn't that he was secretly entering my apartment. He wanted me to know he was there. And for weeks, those receipts were his way of saying hello. I'd been living alone for almost a year when this happened. My apartment was small but comfortable. It was on the 3rd floor of an old building that had seen better days. The rent was cheap, and aside from the occasional creak in the walls, it was quiet. At least, it used to be. One night, after getting home from work, I noticed something strange. The closet door in my bedroom was open. I clearly remembered closing it that morning. I didn't think much of it. Maybe I had forgotten. I shut it and went on with my evening. The next morning, it was open again. That bothered me. I knew I had closed it. This time, I checked the hinges and latch. Everything seemed normal. I laughed it off and left for work. When I came home that night, the closet door was opened wider than before. Not just cracked, wide open. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I searched the apartment. Every room. Every corner. Nobody was there. I convinced myself the old building was settling and somehow causing the door to swing open. Still, I started keeping it shut with a chair. The next morning, the chair was pushed aside. The closet door stood open. I froze. There was no way the chair could have moved on its own. For the first time, I wondered if someone had been inside my apartment. I checked the locks. Nothing appeared damaged. That evening, I bought a cheap security camera online and set it up facing the bedroom. I went to bed feeling ridiculous. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. At first, everything looked normal. Around 2:37 a.m., the closet door slowly opened by itself. I stared at the screen. Then I noticed movement inside the closet. A shadow. Someone was crouching in the darkness. My heart nearly stopped. The figure remained motionless for almost 20 minutes, just sitting there, watching me sleep. Then, slowly, it crawled out. Not walked, crawled. I could barely breathe. The person moved across the floor and disappeared from the camera's view. A few seconds later, the footage suddenly cut out. I grabbed my phone and called the police. They arrived within minutes and searched the apartment. What they found terrified me. Behind the closet was a small maintenance access panel that connected to a narrow space between apartments. The panel had been removed from the inside. Whoever had been hiding there had access to my apartment for weeks. The police never found the person. I moved out the next day, but the worst part wasn't knowing someone had been living behind my wall. It was realizing that every night, while I slept alone, I wasn't actually alone. I rented the upper floor of an old 2-story house when I was 26. The arrangement was simple. The downstairs unit had been empty for months, and I lived alone upstairs. The landlord rarely visited, and aside from a few creaks and groans that came with an old house, Everything was peaceful. For the first few weeks, I loved it. Then I started hearing footsteps. They always came late at night, slow, heavy, deliberate. The sound seemed to come from directly above my bedroom. The problem was that there was no floor above me. I lived on the top level. The only thing above my ceiling was the attic. At first, I convinced myself it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon, maybe squirrels. Old houses make strange noises. That's what everyone says. But these footsteps sounded human. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound again. Step, 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 back and forth across the ceiling. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the pull-down ladder leading to the attic. The moment I opened the hatch, the footsteps stopped. The attic was silent. I shined the light around. Dust, boxes, cobwebs, nothing else. I climbed back down, feeling embarrassed. The next night, the footsteps returned. This time, they lasted almost an hour. I barely slept. Over the following weeks, the sounds became more frequent. Then something even stranger happened. I started hearing a voice. It was faint. So faint that I couldn't make out the words. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, but every time I listened carefully, it seemed to be coming from directly above me, inside the attic. One Saturday afternoon, I finally decided to investigate properly. I climbed into the attic carrying a stronger flashlight. As I searched the far end of the space, I noticed something unusual. A section of insulation had been pushed aside. Behind it was a small area hidden from view. My stomach tightened. There was a sleeping bag, empty food containers, water bottles, and a battery-powered lantern. Someone had been living there. I ran downstairs and called the police. Officers arrived within minutes and searched the attic. They discovered evidence that a person had been staying there for months. The voice I had heard wasn't my imagination. The footsteps weren't old house noises. Someone had been walking above me almost every night. According to the police, the person would leave during the day and return after dark through a damaged vent on the side of the house. They never caught him. The attic was empty when officers arrived. I moved out less than a week later. What still scares me isn't that someone was living above my bedroom. It's the fact that every night, while I thought I was completely alone, a stranger was listening to me from just a few feet away. I had been living alone in my apartment for almost 2 years when this happened. The building was modern, secure, and required a key fob to enter. That's why what happened made absolutely no sense. One night, around midnight, I took out the trash. The hallway was empty, quiet, normal. As I walked back toward my apartment, I noticed a man standing at the far end of the corridor. He was facing the wall, completely motionless. At first, I assumed he was another resident. Maybe he was checking his phone. Maybe he was drunk. I didn't think much of it. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and went to bed. The next morning, I left for work. The hallway was empty. I forgot all about the man until the following night. Around 11:30 p.m., I opened my apartment door to pick up a food delivery. The same man was standing in the hallway, in the exact same spot, facing the wall, not moving, not speaking, just standing there. A chill ran through me. I quickly grabbed my food and locked the door. The next day, I mentioned it to the building manager. He looked confused. When I described the man, he told me no resident matched that description. Still, he promised to check the security footage. That evening, he called me back. His voice sounded uneasy. According to the cameras, nobody had been standing in the hallway during the times I reported. No one. The footage showed an empty corridor. I laughed nervously and assumed I must have mistaken someone for a resident who had already left. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. 3 nights later, I woke up around 3 a.m. I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it. A soft knock. 3 taps on my apartment door. Knock. 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 I looked through the peephole. The same man was standing outside. This time, he wasn't facing the wall. He was facing my door, and he was smiling. My blood ran cold. The smile didn't look natural. It stretched too wide across his face. I immediately stepped back and called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I checked the peephole again. He was gone. Officers searched the building from top to bottom. Nothing. No sign of anyone. The next morning, building management reviewed every security camera. Again, They found nothing. No man, no visitor. No one standing outside my apartment at 3 a.m. A week later, I decided to move. While packing, I met an elderly woman who had lived in the building longer than anyone else. After hearing my story, she became very quiet. Then she said something I still think about today. "You're not the first person who's seen him." I asked who she meant. She simply replied, "The man in the hallway." Then she walked away. To this day, I don't know who or what I saw standing outside my door that night, but one thing is certain. I never felt alone in that apartment again. Living alone was something I had always enjoyed. I liked the quiet. I liked having my own space. And most importantly, I liked knowing that everything in my apartment stayed exactly where I left it. That's why the first strange incident immediately caught my attention. One morning before work, I carefully hung my towel on the bathroom rack. When I returned home that evening, the towel was damp. Not slightly damp, soaking wet. At first, I assumed I had somehow forgotten to hang it properly after my shower. It seemed like a simple mistake. But then it happened again, and again. Every few days, I would come home to find my towel wet. Sometimes the shower curtain would be slightly open. Other times, the bathroom mirror would have streaks on it, as if someone had wiped away steam. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I lived alone. No one else had access to my apartment. At least, that's what I believed. The strange incidents continued for nearly 2 weeks. Then, one evening, I noticed something even more disturbing. A bottle of shampoo that was almost full that morning was now nearly empty. I stood there, staring at it. There was no explanation. Nobody should have been inside my apartment. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, before leaving for work, I decided to run a small test. I placed a single strand of tape across the bathroom door. It was nearly invisible. If anyone opened the door, the tape would break. When I returned home that evening, the tape was gone. My heart started racing. Someone had entered the bathroom. Someone had been inside my apartment. I immediately checked every room. Nothing seemed stolen. Nothing looked disturbed. But now I knew for certain that someone was getting inside. The following day, I installed a hidden camera facing the bathroom entrance. When I reviewed the footage that night, I felt my stomach drop. At approximately 1:12 p.m., while I was at work, my bedroom closet door slowly opened. A man stepped out. My hands started shaking. He looked completely comfortable, as if he belonged there. He walked straight into the bathroom and stayed inside for nearly 20 minutes. Then he returned to the closet and disappeared. I called the police immediately. Officers searched the apartment and discovered a hidden access panel behind the closet wall. The panel connected to an unused maintenance space running through the building. According to investigators, the man had likely been entering my apartment for weeks, maybe longer. The suspect was never found. I moved out less than 48 hours later. What still terrifies me is not that someone was secretly entering my apartment. It's knowing that every day while I was away at work, a complete stranger was treating my home like it was his own. I moved into my apartment shortly after getting a new job. It wasn't anything special. A small one-bedroom unit in a quiet building on the edge of town. But it was affordable, clean, and most importantly, mine. For the first few months, living alone was exactly what I expected. Peaceful, predictable, safe. Then I noticed the toothbrush. One morning, while getting ready for work, I opened the medicine cabinet and froze. There were 2 toothbrushes sitting inside. Mine. And another one. A plain blue toothbrush I had never seen before. I stared at it for several seconds. At first, I assumed it belonged to a previous tenant and had somehow fallen out from behind the cabinet. It sounded silly, but it was the only explanation I could think of. I threw it away and left for work. A week later, it happened again. I opened the cabinet. Another toothbrush, different color, different brand. My stomach tightened. I knew I hadn't bought it, and I knew no one else should have been inside my apartment. After that, strange things started happening. Food disappeared from my refrigerator. A kitchen light I always left off would sometimes be on when I got home. One afternoon, I found a television channel playing that I never watched. The incidents were small, but together, they were impossible to ignore. I started checking the logs obsessively. Everything seemed secure. Still, the feeling of being watched grew stronger every day. One Friday evening, I came home earlier than usual. As I stepped inside, I heard movement coming from the hallway. A quick sound, like someone rushing away. I searched the apartment. Nothing. No one was there. But for the first time, I felt genuinely afraid. The next day, I bought 2 small security cameras. One pointed toward the living room. The other faced the hallway leading to the bedroom. That night, I barely slept. The following afternoon, I reviewed the footage. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Then, shortly after noon, a figure emerged from my bedroom closet. I nearly dropped my phone. A man, thin, unshaven, wearing dark clothing. He walked calmly through my apartment as if he owned the place. He opened my refrigerator, made himself a sandwich, watched television for nearly an hour, then disappeared back into the closet. I called the police immediately. Their investigation revealed a hidden crawl space behind the closet wall. The space connected multiple apartments through old maintenance passages that had never been sealed. The man had apparently been using them to enter vacant units and occasionally occupied ones. He was arrested 2 days later in another building nearby. Even now, years later, I think about those toothbrushes, because while I believed I was living completely alone, someone else had quietly made himself at home inside my apartment. Living alone had never bothered me. In fact, I enjoyed it. After years of sharing apartments with roommates, finally having my own place felt amazing. The apartment was small but comfortable, and for nearly a year, nothing unusual ever happened. Then one morning, after taking a hot shower, I noticed something strange. Words were appearing on the bathroom mirror. At first, they were faint, barely visible through the steam. I leaned closer and read them. "Seem don't forget. Sing sing." I frowned. The message disappeared as the mirror dried. I assumed it was something I had written months earlier and forgotten about. Maybe a joke, maybe a reminder. I wiped the mirror clean and didn't think much of it. 3 days later, another message appeared. This time it said, asterisk, asterisk, I saw you last night. Asterisk, asterisk. My stomach tightened. I knew I hadn't written that. The handwriting wasn't even close to mine. I cleaned the mirror thoroughly and tried to ignore it. But the messages continued. Every few days, a new one appeared whenever steam covered the glass. Asterisk, asterisk, you should lock your door. Asterisk, asterisk, seen someone is watching. Sing sing, sin look behind you. Sing sing. By the 4th message, I was sleeping with lights on. I checked every lock before bed. Sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. The apartment felt different now. Smaller, colder, like someone was always nearby. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I bought a security camera and pointed it directly at the bathroom door. For an entire week, I reviewed the footage. Nothing unusual appeared. No strangers. No intruders. No one entering the apartment. Yet the messages kept showing up. Finally, I called the building manager. The next afternoon, he inspected the bathroom. Within minutes, he found an explanation. Years earlier, a tenant had written dozens of notes on the mirror using a grease pencil. Although the mirror had been cleaned many times, traces of the writing remained. Steam simply revealed them again. I felt immediate relief. Everything suddenly made sense, until the manager noticed something. Near the bottom corner of the mirror was a message unlike the others. The handwriting was different, sharper, newer. The manager stared at it silently. Then he read it aloud. The camera doesn't see everything. Asterisk, asterisk. A chill ran through my body. That message had never appeared before. Neither of us could explain it. The manager eventually left, insisting there had to be a logical reason. Maybe there was, but I moved out a month later, because during my final week in that apartment, one last message appeared on the mirror.